Hello, everyone. My name is Conrad on behalf of Camera Stuff. Hope you are doing pleasantly well tonight. From my side, I am load shed at the moment, so hopefully my UPS lasts the entire session. But yeah, let's pray it does. So, how are you doing? Please, in the comment section, introduce yourself, tell me where you're from, etc., etc. I'm just gonna wait a little bit until I have more people joining the live. So I'm just gonna give it about, I don't know, 10 seconds odd. Hope you're staying productive during the load shedding and whatnot. It's been very difficult, very frustrating. As I said, I am load shed at the moment, so hopefully my internet lasts as well, and hopefully my UPS lasts. All right, so tonight we are going to talk about constant lights versus flash, as to what they are, how they can be used, and what the differences may be. Okay, so that's going to be our topic tonight. I'm just going to wait for more people to join. Okay, we're getting in a few people in already. All right, so I think we can get started. All righty. All right, so as mentioned, we're going to talk about constant lights versus flashes, as to what they are, how they can be used, and what the differences may be. So firstly, let's get some definitions out of the way. So constant light is a type of light that provides a continuous stream of light, such as an LED, fluorescent, halogen, tungsten lighting, etc., etc. Hence the term constant light or continuous light. It's a light that always stays on, unless you switch it off, obviously. As mentioned, there are many types of constant lights, all of them ranging in practicality and in pricing from a photographer's perspective. And I'll explore the broad differences a little bit later. All right, now a flash or a strobe is a type of light that provides a momentary burst of intense light. So that's where all of the energy is concentrated into. It's a momentary flash or burst of light. Examples would be that of speed lights and strobe monolights. Okay, so with definitions out of the way, which one is better to use? Now, before we continue, I think it's worthwhile exploring the spirit of this question, the reason why people ask it in the first place. And I think the reason why people ask this question is because they may have come across a cheap constant light kit, like a fluorescent bulb kit or an LED kit. I think it's fair to say that when people are talking about constant lights versus flash, we're not talking about the type of lights that, I don't know, Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg would use when filming a major blockbuster Hollywood movie. Yeah, so a kit like this. So this was extracted from Amazon. So as mentioned, photographers may come across a kit like this and obviously will ask, is this kit good enough? Can I build a successful studio career out of it? And when comparing the pricing, something like this may cost 4,000 Rand. And when you look at a 9,000 to 12,000 Rand flash kit, I think it's a valid question to ask. Is the price difference worth it? Now, that's going to be the main focus of tonight's discussion. So let's just jump into that, shall we? So from a photographer's point of view, which is better to use? This conversation, I think, is getting more interesting nowadays. A few years ago, the answer was a simple one. Save up and buy flashes. Don't even think about constant lights. The simple reason being that flashes are far more practical and usable as opposed to constant lights. Nowadays, however, because of advancing camera and lighting technologies, a few nuances have crept into the equation. And all of those we're going to explore as we go along. All right, so let's look at some broad pros and cons of each category. All right, so in terms of brightness, constant lights are generally far, far less brighter than that of flashes. The cheapest flash can be anything between 16 to 30 times brighter than some expensive constant lights. So in terms of overall brightness, flashes trump constant lights, just 6 love here. Having more light to work with just means you have a little bit more playroom to work with as far as your camera settings are concerned, and also as far as the placement of the light is concerned. So you can go a little bit further away from your subject and you can explore more camera settings. So you can lower your ISO, you can quicken up your shutter speed, or you can close up your aperture, depending on what you need to do. So when using constant lights, you may struggle to use practical camera settings. Now, what do I mean by practical camera settings? That would be a shutter speed fast enough to avoid motion blur, an aperture small enough that will get most of your subject in focus, and obviously an ISO low enough to avoid image noise. When using constant lights, typically you need to compromise here and there. For example, you may need to use a slower shutter speed, you may need to open up your aperture, or you need to use a gargantuan ISO just to get enough light in. All right, so in addition to that, when using constant light, you're going to need to use operate within a very dark studio. If you have too much ambient light, if you have too much light creeping in through the windows, or if your ceiling lamp is still switched on, you may find that the ambient light may actually overpower your quote-unquote studio lights. Okay, so when using constant lights, just make sure, well, at least you can work with it, but typically just make sure that the studio is dim. All right, so I'm going to show you some photos I took in the studio. So I'm going to compare light brightness and camera settings between different and various types of lighting. So I just want to show you the setup more or less. All right, so with the first example, I used a single fluorescent bulb. That's an 85-watt fluorescent bulb. And I position it 1 meter away from the subject. And again, I'm using my mannequin head, very faithful assistant. These were the settings I needed to use. So 60th of a second, aperture 4.5, and ISO 1600. So that's quite a big ISO. Now, I could have slowed down my shutter speed, but I wanted to replicate quote-unquote real-world situations. So I wanted to pretend that I'm actually shooting a person and that I'm not on a tripod. Yes, here I have the convenience of a still life, a mannequin head, and she's not going to move around anytime soon. Well, hopefully not. And I'm shooting on a tripod at the moment, but as I said, I want to replicate real-world events. So I hesitate to shoot anything slower than 60th of a second. And I possibly could have opened up my aperture as well to 1.8 or 1.4. That would have dropped the ISO quite dramatically. But again, not everybody has a big fast open lens. And if you're going to shoot 1.4 or 1.8, you're only going to get like an eyelash in focus. So I used f4.5 and a 60th of a second for practical means. All right, so with a one light operating at 1 meter away from the subject, that's a rather big ISO. So at 1600, you may see some image noise. Now from my side, I have a fancy camera. It's a Pentax K1. It's more or less the equivalent of a Nikon D850. So it's a nice full frame at 1600. You're not going to see a lot of noise. However, when using an entry-level camera at 1600, a lot of image noise is going to creep in at this point. Okay, so just something to be mindful of. Yes, these lights may be comparatively much cheaper, but as far as usability is concerned, you're going to struggle with your camera settings. So as you can see here, using ISO 1600, and just for the sake of argument, I can suppose, let's say if we had to move that light 2 meters away from the subject, we can use the inverse square law and calculate, well, every time we double the distance, you lose 4 times the amount of light. So with a light 2 meters away from a subject, we would have needed to use an ISO of 6400. Okay. Now, if you're going to go the route of constant lights, it's always a good idea to try and bundle lights together. So we have these brackets that allow you to use 4 bulbs together. That will effectively quadruple the amount of lighting. And I took a photo using the same shutter speed, same aperture, but because we're using the 4 lights, we effectively have 4 times the amount of light, and we went from ISO 1600 to ISO 400. All right, so this is far more usable, far more practical. So quadrupling the amount of lights, that is far better than obviously using the single lights. So when using or looking at constant lights, probably shouldn't go for the 1 bulb options. Look for the 4 bulb options. All right, so what if we use a very expensive constant light? So by expensive, this Godox FV200, is about 8,000 Rand. That's a 200 watt LED constant light. Okay, so I used that at full blast. And my settings, well, I went from ISO 400 to ISO 100, and my shutter speed went from 60th to 80th. So the far more expensive constant light obviously is a wee bit more brighter. But LEDs are much better to use than that of fluorescent bulbs. Fluorescent bulbs, you can't change the power. You can't go up and down with the power unless you physically move the light closer or further away from your subject. With LEDs, you can have the entire range to explore. So you can go from minimum power to maximum power. You can go in increments of 1% at a time. So we have granular incremental control of the light output when it comes to LEDs. Also, typically with LEDs, the color accuracy is also a lot better. That's a topic I'll discuss at the end. All right, so how about we introduce a bit of flash? Now, for the sake of experimentation, I wanted to compare a 200 watt LED to that of a 200 watt strobe. Now, you may think intuitively you're going to get more or less the same results, but reality is quite different. So, with this experiment, I swapped out the 200 watt LED with a 200 watt strobe, and I kept the same settings. So, what do you expect is going to happen? Is the flash going to be a little bit brighter or a little bit dimmer? Okay, just to show you what I used. So that is the Godox MS200. That's a strobe monolight. So using the same settings as before. So you can see how much brighter that flash is in comparison to a 200 watt LED. So both being 200 watts, that may seem a little bit confusing. But allow me to tell you that watts have almost nothing to do with the output power. It has more to do with the input power, the amount of electricity or power necessary for that light to run at full efficiency. Now, because we have different lighting technologies, comparing fluorescents and flashes and tungstens and speed lights, etc., all of them utilize power more efficiently than others. So the watts have actually more to do with power consumption. It has little to do with, or strictly little to do with the output power. All right, so here comparing the 200 watt strobe to a 200 watt LED. So interestingly enough, yes. I'm sorry, I'm just checking out the comments here. All right, okay, let me continue. All right, so strobes, as far as power to cost ratio is concerned, strobes are far better, far more cost effective. Because this strobe is about 2,500 Rand, the 200 watt LED is about, as I said, 8,000 Rand. So you get more oomph out of a flash and better cost effectiveness too. Okay, so I changed the settings just to get a better exposure. So with my aperture, I went from f4.5 to f14. So this is an area where flashes are incredibly useful. Because of the increased output, you have far more range or playroom as far as your camera settings are concerned. So if you need to use f14, that's available to you. If you need to use a wider aperture or you need to change your camera settings, well, these strobes are adjustable as well. So this just proves that with a flash, you're going to get a lot more power, and with that, you get more versatility and playroom with your settings and your positioning of the light as well. All right, so another topic we can discuss, because flashes are much brighter than that of constant lights, unless you're comparing, the type of lights that Steven Spielberg would use, but typically flashes can overpower the sun. Now, if you use constant lights outdoors in broad daylight, they're going to struggle to overpower the sun, if at all. So if you want to shoot outdoors, you're going to need a flash, typically speaking, because the flash can, quote unquote, overpower the sun if you move it close enough to your subject. All right, so with outdoor photography, flashes are typically much more advised, unless you're willing to wait for the sunlight to just dim a little bit. Okay, so anyone out there in YouTube or Facebook land, if you have any questions to ask so far, please do so in the comment section. All right, so we're going to jump into the next topic. All right, so flashes typically do a better job as far as freezing moving objects are concerned. So because of a quicker flash speed, because the flash happens instantaneously, it can freeze your object, even if the object is moving around a little bit, far better than that of constant lights. So I did a bit of a comparison. All right, so using the flash again, using a 15th of a second, aperture 7.0 and ISO 100. Okay, so what I did in front of the mannequin head was wave my hand around like a John Cena, you can't see me maneuver. So with the flash, even at the 15th of a second, my hand movement was frozen quite relatively well. However, comparing that to a LED with exactly the same settings, with exactly the same speed, of my hand movement, you can see how blurry my hand movements now are. So same shutter speed, I didn't cheat here whatsoever. Flashes just do a better job at freezing the object, even if it's moving a little bit. So you'll get crisper, sharper images out of flashes, whereas with LEDs and constant lights in general, they're more so prone to capturing motion blur. Hello, Fortune. Hope you're doing very well. Thank you for popping in. Okay, again, as a reminder, anyone in Facebook or YouTube land, please drop a comment or a question. That's the reason why we're doing all of these live, so we can interact with you guys. Okay, so I've said a lot of nice things about flash now. So what about constant lights? What are they good for? So what you get out of constant lights is, well, WYSIWYG, which stands for what you see is what you get. Now that's the awesome thing about using constant lights. So you'll get a great visual indication as to what the photo is going to look like before actually taking the photo itself. So you can reposition the light, change the angles, change the light modifiers, you can change the intensity of the lights, you can ask the model to move and pose in different directions, etc., etc. You can set up specific lighting ratios between multiple lighting. And on your subject, you'll see exactly where the light is going and where the shadows are falling. So all of this eliminates plenty of guesswork because you can see exactly where the light is going and where the shadows are going to fall. So this is a big score for constant lights. Personally, I found them very enjoyable to work with because of this. Especially working with multiple lights and working with colored lighting as well, like RGB lighting or gel lighting. I get a nice visual preview as to what the image is going to look like, and I can tinker with the settings and the positioning of the model and the lighting just to find that perfect shot and angle. Okay, so don't get me wrong, some strobes can do this as well by means of using the modeling lamps. However, modeling lamps don't give you a proper insight as far as the intensity of light is concerned. Yes, you can use them to gauge both direction and the quality of light, but overall not to the same precision as constant lights. All right, constant lights for me because preferred for videos. So that will obviously be the case because you can't use flashes for videos. So I think this is more so for photographers exploring both options. But it is a very good point. If you want to do half photography, half videography, then constant lights will get both jobs done. Yeah, so that's a very good point. All right. Now, as far as ease of use is concerned, so far I said plenty of great things about flashes, but generally they are more difficult to learn and get into. Not to mention the complication of adding triggers and receivers to the system as well. So a bit of a learning curve is necessary to use these flashes efficiently. You'll need to learn how to correlate flash intensity with camera settings and what proper flash exposure looks like. Now, if you have a light meter, that would be very helpful, but that's going to be an extra, 4,000, 5,000 Rand purchase for a light meter. Otherwise, you're going to go through a lot of guesswork and going to take a lot of test photos and do a lot of micro adjustments just to get to that perfect shot. Now, for constant lights, however, you can use your camera in its full auto mode if you really wanted to, or at least a shutter speed or aperture priority mode. So to some extent, you can allow the camera to do some of the thinking work as far as the exposure or proper camera settings are concerned. With flashes, you need to shoot at full auto, and that in itself is a bit of a learning curve. So generally speaking, flashes they are far easier to use and grant a far easier access to beginner photographers. All right, so that being said, I don't want to sound like flashes are impossible to use. With a bit of practice, a bit of learning, the use of flashes will eventually become second nature to you. All right, so I'm just going to pause there. I see a bunch of comments streaming in. All right, so how can you overpower the sun when using constant lights? So this is a bit of a problem because comparatively speaking, most constant lights are not as powerful or as bright as the sun. So either you can move the constant lights very close to your subject, like it's going to be like 30 centimeters away from your subject, But otherwise, you're going to need to use very, very powerful constant lights. So I made a reference to like Steven Spielberg and Christopher Nolan, the movie directors, what type of lighting they would use, but such lighting can be very, very expensive. Something else you can do is you can scrim your subject. So you can put a diffuser panel above your subject that will diffuse and diminish the intensity of the sunlight. And that will just give your constant light, just some opportunity to illuminate your subject. So, that's a very effective way of going about it. So you can reduce the sunlight by either using a scrim or placing your subject in the shadows. But if you're going to shoot in broad daylight, competing against the sun using constant lights, that's a bit of a very tough arm wrestling match. So this is typically why flashes are much favored, because comparatively speaking, if you place your flash close enough, they can be more powerful than the sun. All right, so how many lights do you need in a photo studio for proper lighting? How many lights do a photo studio need for proper lighting? You can start off with one and a reflector. So I think at base level, learning to use one light and a reflector, I've always said if you can't take good photos using one light, you need to relearn light, because the point of adding extra lighting, supplementary lighting, is to complement the key light. So using a second light, that's going to be used as a fill-in light, and you can use a third and fourth light if you want to illuminate the backdrop, or if you want to provide room lighting to your subject, or hair lighting. So one light is going to be your main player in a manner of speaking. So your key light, that's going to act like the Batman, and all of your supplementary lighting, that's going to be the sidekicks. So this is a tough question to answer. So it depends on what you want to do. If you want to illuminate your backdrop, you're going to need an extra 2 lights. But for portraits and more so common photography, don't know what to call it, but 1 or 2 lights, maybe 3 lights at maximum would be great. But as I said, learn with 1 light and a reflector and take it from there. All right, so that's a good topic for our next video. How many lights do I need for my studio? Thank you for the suggestion. I will do that in a couple of weeks' time, I think. All right, so get back to the slideshow here. All right, so one thing I didn't include, I just want to talk about events, right? So if you want to do events like wedding photography or party photography, flashes are often favored here because big, powerful constant lights will be a distraction. You may also spoil the mood or the ambience of the reception that was carefully planned for, especially when it comes to the first dance of a wedding. So if you're going to approach all of that with big, powerful constant lights, you're going to make it look like a sports stadium with floodlights switched on. It's going to be a massive distraction. So flash is not entirely non-distracting, but typically less invasive than that of constant lights. All right, so next topic I want to talk about would be that of modifiability. All right, so I think it is a big question you have to ask yourself when buying new studio lighting. How can I transform this light? So how can I make this a quote-unquote big light, or a small light, or a soft light, or a hard light, etc., etc.? How can I modify this light to create different lighting qualities? So for that, you need a type of light that has what is called an accessory mount. So the most popular one would be that of the Bones accessory mount. So you're going to find that on most strobes, and with speed lights, you can use a speed light bracket to accommodate all of these different light modifiers. Now, a light modifier can be like an umbrella, a beauty dish, a softbox, a barn door, a snoot, a reflector dish, etc., etc. Anything that you place in between the light source and the subject itself that changes the properties of the light, that is called a light modifier. So you want something that is multi-adaptable, that can use a broad variety of different light modifiers, because then you have options as far as crafting your light is concerned. So as I spoke about, soft light, hard light, big light, hard light, etc. You can even use a combination of everything that I just mentioned. So crafting a light in a very specific way, it's great to have a light that can accommodate all of these light modifiers. Now, if we're going to use something like a fluorescent bulb kit or an LED panel, unfortunately, you can't fit most of these light modifiers onto them. So for that, you may need to MacGyver something or use a scrim diffuser panel to soften a light if you want to do so. Yeah, but unfortunately with these type of lightings, you can't attach anything onto the lights. And maybe an umbrella, but soft boxes, beauty dishes, unfortunately not. Okay, so with LED panels and these fluorescent bulbs, you just have fewer options to play with. All right, so now I want to jump onto a topic known as color accuracy. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when it comes to constant lights, some are not great quality, right? So they are cheap for a reason. And the reason why they are cheap is because their color accuracy is not great whatsoever. So we're going to talk about a thing known as the CRI, or color rendering index. So the color rendering index, or CRI for short, measures the ability of an artificial constant light source to accurately reproduce colors of an object it illuminates. Okay, so this is a reference number you can use when purchasing lights or before purchasing lights. So the CRI, that is a score out of 100. The higher the number, the better the color accuracy. Will be. The lower the number, the worse the color accuracy will be. Yeah, so CRI uses natural light as a benchmark, and artificial lights are given a score out of 100 to mark their color accuracy in comparison. As I said, the higher the score out of 100, the better the color accuracy. The lower the score, the worse the color accuracy. Now, to explain this a little bit further, with the entire color spectrum that comprises all of the colors, obviously the blues, the reds, the greens, the pinks, etc., with certain artificial lights, typically the cheaper ones, the light may not reproduce certain colors of the color spectrum all too well. So depending on what you're using, certain colors may not be captured accurately, while others may not. For example, fluorescent lighting tends to have a bit of a green shift to it. As a result, the reds tend to suffer. Therefore, the reds will appear a little bit bland and a little bit desaturated. Now, that's something important to think about because skin tones tend to have a lot of reds and yellow pigments in it. So if you're going to use cheaper lights, then the skin tones are going to appear rather bland and very desaturated. It's a little bit gray. Now, you can resuscitate some of that with clever Photoshop work, but that's going to require extra legwork, and it's going to be a bit of a pain, especially if you have 1,000 photos to edit. Now, with a more so expensive lighting, with a higher indicated CRI rating, they will reproduce all of the colors accurately throughout the entire color spectrum. All right, so we'll have minimal Photoshop work to do. So just to reiterate, some cheaper lights don't reproduce certain colors very well. For example, with fluorescent lighting, because they have a very chemical green color to them, they are going to diminish the rates slightly, and that's going to be a problem as far as skin tones are concerned. So when purchasing constant lights, look out for the CRI number. You typically want something in the 90s. So if something is in the 90s, ideally 97, 98, you have a proper light that can capture good color accuracy. Whereas a light that has a CRI in the 80s, 70s, or 60s, that's just going to do not as great a job. All right, so we're getting close to our conclusions now. Okay, so this matchup between flashes and constant lights. Now, if it was a soccer match, you'd think flashes would win 8-2. So there is a clear winner here. If you want to spend your money well, flashes are going to be the better option going forward. Because of the higher light output and with more versatility and options that you can use and modify your light with. However, if on a budget, cheaper continuous lighting kits can still work for you. You just need to understand the limitations of their use. For example, with low output, you may need to boost your ISO and move your light closer to your subject. If you can play within those margins, then certainly you can still create some magic. So for some good examples here, cheaper constant lighting kits are great for shallow depth of field portraits, still life photography, and product photography as well. Beyond that, if you want to do family photos or outside photography, you're going to struggle with your camera settings because the lights just are not bright enough. That being said, there are usually successful photographers out there that use either or both constant lights and flashes. It's all about understanding the gear and knowing what the gear is good for and not. And hopefully I've answered some of those questions throughout the session. All right, so that's pretty much it from my side. So I don't know if anybody in YouTube land or Facebook land, if you have any further questions to ask, if you're still curious about something, yeah, please pop me a comment. All right, so let's see if I missed any comments. Doesn't seem so. All right. Now, there's a couple of extra things I want to say. So flashes have a better cost to power ratio. So some of them may be quite expensive, but they are better investments going forward. Whereas certain constant lights, especially that kit I showed you initially, if you're going to look at something like this, it's a bit of a dead investment in my personal opinion. Yes, you can still use it, but your options are very limited. Now, as I said, if you're happy to play within those options, by all means, you'll have some great success with these lighting, should I say. But beyond that, if you want to branch out a little bit, experiment with new things, shoot outdoors, shoot a variety of different subjects, etc., especially bigger subjects that require smaller apertures and faster shutter speeds and lower ISOs, etc., you may find that these lights are going to struggle. Okay, here's a question. I just bought the Godox 8400 Pro. You think it's a right decision? Absolutely. It's if I had to make a decision between all of the Godox lights, it's definitely going to be the 8400. So sufficient power at the 400 watts, so that's going to work incredibly well outdoors, competing against the sun. You can shoot indoors. It's battery powered. You can buy a what's it called? A battery adapter as well. So if you want to use ESCOM power, I know that sounds like a terrible thing to suggest now, but you can use a power battery adapter with 8400 as well. So if your battery runs out, you can use power from the walls directly. Very modifiable, so it has the bones mount, so you can use a big variety of different light modifiers. So I think you definitely made an excellent choice there. Kind of jealous, actually. How important is it to use a light meter when using flashes? All right, so this is a cool question. I'm just going to get my face back up. Based on my research, it seems like opinions are split 50-50. Some people like using a light meter, some people just don't like using a light meter. So for an example, some people will say that it's dinosaur technology. Fred Flintstone used a light meter a long time ago. In the age of digital photography, I mean, you have the results on the back of your screen. So you can just play around with your lighting and your camera settings, and the results are right there in front of you. That being said, personally, and I side with people who like to say that, if you have enough money for a light meter, buy one. Forget groceries, forget school fees, forget your children's braces, buy a light meter because it's incredibly useful in a studio environment. But I say that personally because I'm a very meticulous type of shooter. I like to get my settings right. I like to get things as precise as possible straight off the bat, so I don't need to struggle along the line. But that's just me personally. I've met photographers who seem to be, they like being as chaotic as possible. So the more chaotic the environment is, the better they perform. And they typically don't care or care to use a light meter because it slows them down. So I think it just depends on what type of shooter you are. So a light meter can be useful, or it's something that may just get in your way. So my personal opinion, a light meter is incredibly useful in a studio environment. It's a nice learning tool as well. I've learned so much using a light meter. And if you want to get that precision, if you want to do less guesswork, and also for the sake of future use as well. So let's say you're doing a shoot for a business, so you can figure out your settings using a light meter. You can write that down in a journal somewhere. So let's say 2 years later, they ask you to do exactly the same shoot. Like you have your light meter, you have your references, and you can just replicate the results right then and there. All right, so unfortunately, I don't have a straight answer there for you. I think it depends broadly on how you go about your photography. If you're a meticulous shooter, by all means, get that light meter. It's going to help you out tremendously. I have met photographers who have bought light meters, but it's just, they told me it's just something that gets in the way. They like to shoot straight off the hip. They like to be chaotic. They don't mind making minor adjustments here and there as far as the lighting and camera settings are concerned. Yeah, so such people don't like equipment telling them what to do, in other words. All right, so I bought the Godox 8200, is it a good choice for starting in photography? Absolutely. The Godox 8200 is a miraculous strobe. So extremely lightweight. You get plenty of flashes out of it. What's it like? 480 or 500 shots on full power from a single battery charge. That is incredible. The 200 watt for plenty of uses, extremely versatile for indoor photography, outdoor photography. If you want to double up your power, this is a cool thing about the 8200. You can buy a bracket that allows you to use two 8200s next to one another. So you effectively make a 400 watt strobe out of it. So if you need that extra bit of juice, you can buy that extra 200 and you can combine the two next to one another. But beyond that, it is our most popular selling strobe, the 8200. People love it. You've absolutely made a good choice there. All right, so it's continuous lighting, good for indoor and outdoor photography. So outdoor photography, you may struggle. You may struggle because of the intensity of the sunlight. Now, if you can diminish the sunlight by using a diffuser panel or moving your subjects into the shadows, yes, you can manage to make constant lights work for you. But if you're going to work in broad daylight, competing directly against the sun, there aren't many constant lights that can compete against the sun, unless you have, as I said, Steven Spielberg's budget. For indoor photography, absolutely. You may also struggle with your camera settings depending on what you're using. You may need to boost your ISO to ISO 1600, maybe 800, maybe 3200, depending on how close you place your lights to your subject. So, also a very difficult one to answer. It all depends on what you're going to do with it. So if you're happy to move your light fairly close to your subject, if you're going to do like shallow depth of field portraits or still life photography, if you're happy to use ISO 800, if your camera is not going to show a lot of image noise at ISO 800, constant lights can be usable indoors as well. Outdoor photography, I would lean towards flashes. All right, so nice stream of comments coming in. I do value it so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so unless there are any more comments coming in, I think I'm going to call it quits within the next 2 minutes odd. If you still want to keep me around, if you're bored with load shedding and you're just watching me on your cell phone or whatever, please continue asking questions and then we can spend more time together. Checking I haven't missed anything. Okay, this in reference to the 8400. Feels much better hearing talk about it. You made a good choice. Like I said, I'm jealous actually. The 8400 is an amazing choice. I think a while ago it made it won awards as well. It won best flash out of all of the flashes. I think it was 2018, 17, I think. Yeah, so it's a very, very good flash. You made a really good choice. What flash trigger would you recommend to pair with the 8200? Either the Godox X2 or X Pro. Either one you'd be very happy with. So they talk directly to the 8200, so you don't need receivers. They are fully compatible with all of the 8200's features as well. So you can use manual mode, you can use TTL mode, you can use multi-mode. They are high-speed sync compatible as well. Rear curtain sync and front curtain sync as well. So you have all of the features and all of the abundance with either the X2 trigger or the X Pro trigger. Now, the differences between the two, the X2 has an onboard hot shoe. That's useful. So if you want to stack flash triggers, so if you have a different flash system, you can stack a variety of different flash systems together. Or you can use a flash on top of the X2 as well. So as a bit of a fill-in light, or if you want to bounce light off a ceiling, you can use a flash on your camera together with the trigger. That's quite cool. Now I have the X Pro here. So this is my personal X Pro. So it's nicely conveniently placed here. This is great if you're using multiple flashes. So if you're using 2, 3, 4, 5 flashes all at once, because of a bigger screen and a better button layout, I do recommend this one because the settings and all the different flashes are just easier to find using the bigger screen. So the cost difference, 1,400 Rand for the X2. I think the X Pro is about 1,800. Okay, so if you're using 1 or 2 flashes, the X2 will be great. More beneficial enough. Am I still live? Yes, I am. So if you have a question to ask, please do so. It is a massive pleasure. I do like it that you're enjoying it as well. I will continue doing this until all of you get bored of seeing my face. So I think our next session is going to be about reflectors. So if you're keen to learn about reflectors, 5-in-1 reflectors specifically, the different sizes, what every side or color is used for, I'm going to be outside. I'm going to show you all the different results using the different size of a reflector. So I think that's going to be in 2 weeks' time. All right, so I think that's going to be it from my side. So thank you for joining. Hope you have a pleasant night further. So, if you're not going to get more load shedding, otherwise, get the kettle on as quickly as possible. Make your coffee, get your coffees in. But beyond that, hope it's going to be a pleasant night further. So that's going to be it from my side, should I say? Yeah. So enjoy your night, and I'm going to say bye-bye.